Deep in Wyoming territory, 1873, where mercy is as scarce as warmth, Sarah Mitchell cradles her infant daughter against the bitter wind. Her tears freeze before they fall as she wraps her baby in snow-crusted blankets, a desperate mother's last resort to numb the gnawing hunger. Miles away, James Cooper clutches his bleeding side, tracking through the endless white, his own past haunting each labored step. Neither knows that fate has set their paths to cross, or that survival will demand more than just enduring the cold. But when a wounded cowboy discovers a widow and her child half buried in snow, their story becomes one that will echo through generations. What happens when two broken souls find each other in the depths of winter's cruel embrace? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's fingers trembled as they traced the seams of the empty flour sack, searching for any remaining dust of sustenance. The rough fabric, once heavy with promise, now hung limp and useless in her hands. 3 months since Thomas's death, and the pantry shelves echoed their loss with hollow emptiness. "Just a little longer, Emma," she whispered to the bundle in the makeshift cradle, a wooden crate padded with every blanket she could spare. Her daughter's cry had weakened over the past days, becoming a soft mewling that frightened Sarah more than any scream. The last candle stub flickered on the table, casting wild shadows across the cabin's weathered walls. Sarah had been rationing it, lighting it only during Emma's evening feeding, but tonight she needed its warmth. The darkness pressed too close, too heavy with memories. She could still see Thomas standing by the door, adjusting his mining lamp. 3 more months, he'd said, and we'll have enough saved to build that proper nursery. His smile, always so sure, so full of tomorrow's promises. He'd kissed them both, Emma just 2 weeks old then, and headed out into another Wyoming dawn. The accident had taken more than her husband. It had stolen their future, their dreams, their chance at the life they'd planned when they'd first homesteaded. This patch of frontier. Sarah touched her wedding ring, the metal cold against her skin. A gust of wind rattled the cabin's bones, and Emma stirred. Sarah moved to the window, watching snow build against the glass. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally rolling in from the mountains, bringing with it a darkness deeper than night. Her gaze fell to the chest, where she kept Thomas's things. Among them lay the map he'd drawn of the territory, marking the locations of neighboring homesteads. The closest was 15 miles away, might as well be 1,000 in this weather. The town lay another 10 miles beyond that, a journey that had been challenging even in fair conditions, with Thomas leading their wagon. Emma's whimper drew her back to the cradle. Sarah lifted her daughter, feeling the fragile warmth of her through the layers of cloth. "You're all I have left," she whispered, rocking gently, "and I'm running out of ways to keep you alive." The truth of those words settled like frost in her chest. She'd tried everything, stretching their stores, setting snares for rabbits that never came, even attempting to dig through the frozen ground for any remaining root vegetables in their snow-buried garden. But winter had proved merciless, and their isolation complete. Sarah glanced again at the window. The snow was falling faster now, thick flakes obscuring what little daylight remained. Common sense told her to stay put, to wait out the storm. But common sense hadn't fed them yesterday, and it wouldn't feed them tomorrow. Her decision crystallized like ice. They couldn't stay, not with empty shelves and a dying infant, not with another storm bearing down. The nearest homestead might as well have been the moon, but at least the moon offered more hope than these bare walls. She laid Emma back in the cradle and began to move with purpose. Into Thomas's old pack went their remaining blanket, her Bible, and the few precious items she couldn't bear to leave behind. She donned every layer of clothing she owned, then wrapped Emma in the same fashion. The final task was the hardest. Sarah knew that warm babies survived cold better than crying ones. She'd learned that much from the native women who sometimes traded with the settlers. With trembling hands, she packed fresh snow between the layers of Emma's blankets, praying it would numb the hunger while preserving her daughter's precious life. "Lord, she whispered, touching the cross at her throat. "I know you didn't bring us this far to lose us now. Show us the way." As if in answer, the wind howled louder, and the last candle guttered out. James Cooper's fingers fumbled with his badge, the metal slick with blood and melting snow. The silver star, once a symbol of law in 4 territories, now served only to mark him for the buzzards. If any were fool enough to fly in this storm, he'd earned it bringing order to Cheyenne, wearing it proudly through the Apache wars, and now it might just get him killed. The wound in his side burned like hellfire. Those bastards had been waiting, 6 of them against his 1. Smart Money said they'd been tipped off. The same informant who told him where to find the Riker gang had probably sold him out just as quick. "Getting slow, old man," he muttered, stumbling against a snow-laden pine. His breath came out in ragged clouds, each one shorter than the last. The temperature was dropping fast, and the blood trail he was leaving would freeze black against the white, assuming the fresh snow didn't cover it first. He'd managed to wing 2 of them before his horse took a bullet, throwing him into the ravine. The fall had probably saved his life, but the landing had driven a broken branch deep into his side. Now, every step was a negotiation with consciousness. Every breath, a battle against the cold trying to seep into his bones. The badge caught the dying light as he slumped against the tree trunk. 23 years of service, and what did he have to show for it? A collection of scars, a reputation that brought more trouble than peace, and now a gut wound that was probably going to kill him if the cold didn't get there first. But James Cooper hadn't survived this long by giving up. He forced himself upright, using the tree for support. The snow was falling heavier now, but through the swirling white he caught a glimpse of something. Smoke, rising thin and desperate against the darkening sky. Hope was a dangerous thing in these mountains. Smoke meant people, and people meant either help or more trouble. In his experience, the latter was more common. But right now, trouble with a roof over it seemed better than freezing to death in the open. He checked his revolver. 3 rounds left. Not much, but it would have to do. The badge he unpinned from his coat, studying it one last time before, tucking it into his inner pocket. No sense advertising who he was until he knew what kind of welcome awaited him. The wound protested as he pushed away from the tree, sending fresh warmth spreading across his side. Bad sign, that warmth. He'd seen enough men die to know that feeling warm in a snowstorm usually meant you were already halfway to meeting your maker. Each step was an act of will now. The snow had soaked through his boots, and his fingers had gone numb inside his gloves. But that thread of smoke pulled him forward, a lifeline in the growing dark. He tried to focus on it, to push away the memories of the ambush that kept trying to cloud his mind. They'd been so damn confident, the Riker boys, laughing, as they circled him, taking their time with their shots. "Ain't so high and mighty now, are you, Marshal?" The youngest one had called out, voice cracking like he was still growing into his evil. The badge pressed against his chest with each labored step, a reminder of why he'd chosen this life. Not for glory or power, but because somebody had to stand between the devils and the decent folk, even if it meant dying alone in a Wyoming snowstorm. The smoke was clearer now, rising from what looked like a small cabin set back against the tree line. No other tracks in the snow. Either whoever was inside hadn't left recently, or the storm had already covered their trails. James paused, swaying slightly as another wave of dizziness washed over him. The smart play would be to watch the cabin for a while, make sure it wasn't one of the Riker's bolt holes. But the cold was getting worse, and the light was failing fast. He could feel his thoughts starting to scatter like leaves in a wind. "Decision time, old man." He took one step toward the cabin, then another. The badge seemed to grow heavier against his chest, carrying the weight of every choice that had led him here. One way or another, this storm was going to end his hunt for the Riker gang. The only question was whether he'd live to start it again. As if to answer him, a sound carried through the swirling snow, a baby's cry, thin and fading, like the last note of a sad song. Sarah's hand didn't shake as she leveled Thomas's revolver at the cabin door. The weight of it was familiar. He'd insisted she learn to shoot it that first winter on the homestead. A woman alone needs to be her own protection sometimes, he'd said. How right he'd been. The footsteps outside grew closer, heavy and uneven. Through the window, she could make out a dark figure struggling through the snow. Blood marked their trail, fresh drops of crimson against white, already being erased by the storm. Emma stirred against her chest, safely bundled beneath her shawl. Sarah adjusted her grip on the revolver, remembering Thomas's lessons. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Both eyes open. Breathe steady. The door rattled, then swung open on a gust of wind and snow. A man filled the doorway, tall despite his stooped posture. Blood stained his coat where he clutched his side. "Don't move," Sarah commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "I've got 6 shots and I know how to use them." The stranger raised his head slowly. His face was weathered, lined with pain and years, but his eyes were sharp despite their fever-bright glaze. "Ma'am," he managed, "I don't doubt that." Then his legs buckled, and he collapsed into the snow that had blown in with him. Emma chose that moment to cry, a weak, plaintive sound that seemed to echo the stranger's groan. Sarah kept the revolver trained on him, but her resolve wavered. The man hadn't drawn his own weapon, though she could see one holstered at his hip. "Are you alone?" she demanded. "Yes," he answered through gritted teeth, "though there might be others following, not friends." Sarah's mind raced. The stranger was clearly hurt, possibly dying. If others were coming, others who might not collapse at her doorstep, she couldn't leave him there as a marker to her location. "Can you stand?" he tried, making it halfway before slumping back. "Give me a minute." That minute might be more than they had. Sarah made her decision, though she kept the revolver ready. "I'm going to help you up, but if this is a trick—" "No trick," he breathed. "Just a fool who got himself shot." She approached cautiously, keeping Emma secure with one arm while extending the other. Up close, she could see how pale he was beneath his wind-burned skin. His clothes, though trail-worn, were of good quality. A lawman, maybe, or a merchant. Someone who'd lived soft enough to own fine things, but hard enough to wear them thin. Together they managed to get him to the chair by the dying fire. Blood smeared the wooden floor where he'd dragged himself. Sarah held the revolver in her lap as she checked his wound. "Bad?" he asked. "Bad enough." The gash in his side was deep, and the cold had done him no favors. "You need proper doctoring, don't we all?" His gaze drifted to Emma, then back to Sarah's face. Something shifted in his expression. "You're preparing to leave?" It wasn't a question. Sarah saw no point in denying it. "The storm's getting worse, yet you're still here." The baby needed rest. "And now—" she gestured to his wound. He closed his eyes briefly, pain etching deeper lines around them. "James Cooper," he said, "since we seem to be sharing misfortune." "Sarah Mitchell." She kept her hand near the revolver, but her finger had moved away from the trigger. "And this is Emma." James Cooper looked around the cabin, taking in the empty shelves, the packed bag by the door. Understanding dawned in his fever-bright eyes. "How long since you've eaten?" "Long enough." Sarah straightened, a challenge in her voice. "We manage." "No," he said softly. "You survive. There's a difference." The truth of those words hung in the air between them, heavy as the storm clouds outside. Sarah felt something shift inside. Her, not trust, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, hope. The abandoned mine shaft wasn't much, but its darkness offered more mercy than the storm outside. Sarah knelt beside James, her fingers working by touch as she pulled the small leather pouch from her pack. The herbs within had been her grandmother's legacy, knowledge passed down through generations of women who knew that frontier survival, often hung by the thinnest of threads. "This will hurt," she warned, crushing dried yarrow leaves between her fingers. The bitter scent filled the close air. James managed a weak laugh that ended in a grimace. "Can't hurt worse than getting ventilated." "By Riker's boys." Sarah's hands stilled. "Riker, the gang that's been terrorizing the territory." "The same." His voice was tight with pain. "Been tracking them 3 months, got careless. They were waiting." Emma whimpered from her nest of blankets, and Sarah moved to check her before returning to James's side. The wound in his side was angry, edges hot to the touch. "You're a lawman, then." "Marshal," he hissed as she began cleaning the wound. "Though at the moment I'm just another fool dying in the snow." "You're not dying." Sarah worked the yarrow into a poultice, the way her grandmother had taught her. "Not while I have anything to say about it." The mine shaft was cold, but at least it blocked the wind. Their single lantern cast strange shadows on the rough-hewn walls, making the space feel both smaller and larger than it was. Sarah had found it years ago, during happier times exploring with Thomas. She'd never imagined she'd return here like this. "Your husband teach you medicine?" James asked, clearly trying to distract himself from her ministrations. "My grandmother. She learned from the Cheyenne women." Sarah began wrapping the poultice. "In place. Said any woman who came west better know more than just cooking and sewing." Smart woman. She was. Sarah tied off the bandage. "She also said, fever dreams speak truth, that daylight won't tell. You've been muttering about someone named Mary." James went still under her hands. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "My wife lost her and our son to cholera 10 years ago now. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had to offer. "Life out here takes more than it gives sometimes." His eyes found Emma in the lantern light. "But sometimes it gives back too." Sarah checked his forehead. The fever was rising, but not as quickly as she'd feared. From her medicine pouch, she pulled the last of her willow bark. It would help, with both the fever and the pain, though she'd been saving it for Emma. "Drink this," she ordered, steeping the bark in hot water from her canteen. "All of it." He complied without argument, which worried her more than his fever. A man like James Cooper didn't strike her as someone who took orders easily. The storm howled outside their shelter, a reminder of the wilderness waiting to reclaim them. Sarah added the last of their fuel to the small fire she'd risked building. The smoke found its way out through the mine's natural chimney, but she still worried it might draw attention. "They won't be tracking in this," James said, reading her concern. "Even Riker's not that crazy." "How many?" 6 originally. "I got 2 before they got me." He shifted, wincing. "The others won't quit, though, not while I'm alive." Sarah touched the medicine pouch, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. "Then we'll have to make sure you stay that way." His eyes met. Hers in the firelight, fever bright but clear. "Why are you helping me?" "Because it's right." She checked Emma again, adjusting the blankets. "And because I'm tired of watching death win." The fire crackled between them, casting warmth against the cold seeping through the mine's walls. Outside, the storm raged on, but in here, for this moment at least, they had found a kind of peace. "Tell me about your grandmother," James said softly, "the one who taught you about herbs." So Sarah did, letting the stories flow like medicine, healing more than just his wounds. As the long night settled around them, dawn crept into the mine shaft like a thief, stealing away the shadows that had hidden them through the night. Sarah woke to find James already alert, though he hadn't moved from his position. His color was better, the fever having broken sometime in the dark hours. "Your medicine worked," he said quietly, mindful of Emma still sleeping. "Though I'm not. Sure, I deserved the dreams it brought." Sarah checked his bandages, pleased to find the angry red around the wound had faded. As she worked, James reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded bundle of papers. "You need to see these," he said, spreading wanted posters across the ground between them. "Need to understand what kind of men might be coming." The sketches were crude but effective, 4 faces marked by cruelty and greed. The numbers beneath. Their portraits made Sarah's breath catch. $5,000 each, dead or alive. "The Riker brothers," James explained. "Oldest to youngest. Matthew, Luke, John, and Mark. Their father was a preacher before the war, had a twisted sense of humor, naming them that way." Sarah studied the faces. "You said there were 6 men who ambushed you. 2 hired guns. Local. Muscle." His jaw tightened. "They're dead now." The way he said it left no room for doubt. Sarah looked at the posters again, reading the lists of crimes beneath each face. Murder, robbery, arson, a litany of destruction across 3 territories. "They're animals," James continued, "but smart ones. Been running a protection. Racket across Wyoming, burning out homesteaders who won't pay, then buying up the land cheap through frontmen. Understanding dawned cold in Sarah's chest. The mining company that's been consolidating claims, that's them. James nodded. Your husband's accident, was it ever properly investigated? There was no investigation. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. They said the support beams were rotted, that he should have checked them better. Of course they did. James's hand found hers, rough calluses against her work-hardened palm. I've been building a case for months, following their paper trail, tracking their movements. Finally got close enough to make them nervous. Emma stirred, making the small snuffling sounds that preceded waking. Sarah gathered her daughter close, breathing in her warm, sweet scent. They won't stop, James said. Not now. If they find us. He left, the thought unfinished. Sarah touched one of the posters, tracing the cruel lines of Matthew Riker's face. They killed Thomas, didn't they? It wasn't an accident. I believe so. Can't prove it yet, but the pattern fits. James watched her carefully. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. No. Sarah felt something shift inside her, grief crystallizing into purpose. Knowing wouldn't have changed anything, but now... She looked down at Emma, then back at the posters. Her daughter deserved more than a life haunted by men like the Rikers. Thomas deserved more than to be just another accident in their ledger of crimes. Your fever's broken, she said. Can you ride? If I have to. His eyes held a question. The nearest town is 25 miles south. Law there? A sheriff, I trust. Man named Henderson. Sarah began packing her things, movements quick and decisive. Then that's where we go. You need a proper doctor, and I need to tell Henderson what I know about Thomas's death. Sarah, James's voice stopped her. It's not your fight. She turned. To him, steel in her gaze. They made it my fight when they killed my husband, when they made my daughter an orphan. I won't hide while they do the same to other families. A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. You're quite something, Sarah Mitchell. So my grandmother always said. She helped him to his feet, steadying him when he swayed. She also said, justice doesn't always wear a badge. Together, they faced the mine shaft's entrance, where morning light painted the snow in shades of promise. The storm had passed, leaving a world reborn in white. Somewhere out there, 4 evil men were hunting them. But for the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah felt truly alive, and that was worth any risk. Sarah unfolded Thomas's map carefully, its creases worn soft with use. The parchment had yellowed at the edges, and his careful ink marks had faded. But the trails he'd marked still stood out clear against the terrain's contours. He'd spent years updating it, adding notes about seasonal creek crossings and sheltered valleys. Your husband knew the country well, James observed, studying the map over her shoulder. They'd found his horse grazing in a sheltered copse, steam rising from its flanks in the morning cold. He explored every chance he got. Sarah traced a line with her finger. This route here, he called it the Ghost Trail. Said the Indians used it long ago to move unseen through the territory. James nodded approvingly. Stays high, follows natural cover. Smart. He winced as he mounted but managed to settle in the saddle. You ever ridden double before? Not. Since I was courting. Sarah secured Emma to her chest in a sling made from her shawl, then accepted James's help up behind him. The horse shifted, adjusting to their combined weight. Keep her between us, James instructed. Share our warmth. And hold tight. We'll need to make good time before the snow melts enough to show our tracks. Sarah wrapped one arm around his waist, careful of his wound. Even through layers of winter clothing, she could feel the tension in his muscles, the way he held himself against the pain. They set out along Thomas's ghost trail, the horse picking its way carefully through the fresh snow. The morning sun turned the world crystalline, each branch and boulder draped in white brilliance. It would have been beautiful if they weren't being hunted. Tell me about the ghost trail, James said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Why'd your husband map it? Sarah smiled against his back, remembering Thomas's enthusiasm. He was fascinated by the old ways, spent time with any tribal elder who'd talk to him, learning their stories. Said modern folk were too dependent on obvious routes, too afraid to trust the land's own paths. Wise man. He was. Sarah adjusted Emma, who had fallen into a peaceful sleep. This trail follows what he called spirit lines, natural features, that guide you if you know how to read them. See that notch in the ridge ahead? There's always a path through, no matter the season. James studied the terrain with new appreciation. Your husband's knowledge might just save our lives. They rode on, following Thomas's careful markings. The map showed more than just trails. It noted subtle landmarks, safe camping spots, places where springs wouldn't freeze even in deepest winter. Each annotation was a gift from the past, reaching forward to guide them. There, Sarah pointed to a stand of pines. Thomas marked that grove, said it blocks wind from 3 directions and has good sight lines. James reined in, considering. Good place to rest the horse. Give Emma a chance to nurse. They dismounted carefully, James's movements stiff but controlled. Sarah settled against a tree trunk to feed Emma, while James tended to the horse and checked their back trail. No sign of pursuit, he reported, easing down beside them. But that won't last. Snow's starting to soften. Sarah studied the map. Again, Emma contentedly nursing. The next section's tricky, crosses 3 ridges before dropping into Shadow Valley. Shadow Valley? Named for the way clouds catch there, Thomas said. Creates natural fog banks, even in clear weather. James's eyes lit with tactical understanding. Perfect place for an ambush, or perfect place to lose someone following you. He gave her an appraising look. You're not just reading that map. You know this country. I should. Walked every mile of it with Thomas while I was carrying Emma. Sarah traced their route ahead. There's a cave system halfway through the valley. Local folks think it's haunted. Nobody goes there. Sounds promising. James checked his pistol, grimacing at the low ammunition. How far? We can make it by nightfall if we push. Sarah met his gaze. But you're bleeding again. He touched his side, fingers coming away red. Notice that, did you? A blind man would notice. You need rest. Rest is a luxury we can't afford. His voice was firm but kind. I've ridden through worse. Sarah remembered the wanted posters, the prices on the Riker brothers' heads. Have you survived worse? Once or twice. He helped her up, then mounted with barely a wince. Your husband's ghost trail, my experience keeping breathing when I shouldn't, might be enough to see us through. As they rode on, Sarah kept one hand on the map and the other around James's waist. Between them, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her safety depended on the wisdom of a dead man's markings and the strength of a wounded one's will. James pulled the broken compass from his pocket, its glass face spider-webbed with cracks from his fall. The needle swung erratically, dancing between north and nowhere as if confused by its own purpose. Like him, he thought, a lawman who'd lost his true north somewhere between duty and vengeance. Storms changing, Sarah said softly, her breath warm against his shoulder. They'd been riding hard for hours, following Thomas's ghost trail through increasingly rough country. Air feels different. She was right. The wind had shifted, carrying that peculiar stillness that preceded heavy snow. Emma stirred between them, making small sounds of protest at the cold. We need to find shelter, James said, tucking the useless compass away. Can't risk being caught in the open when this hits. There's a shepherd's hut marked on the map, maybe 2 miles ahead. Sarah's voice held a tremor she couldn't quite hide. If it's still standing. The horse picked its way carefully along a narrow ridge, hooves crunching through ice-crusted snow. James felt Sarah's arm tighten around his waist as they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch. You're good at this, she said suddenly. At what? Staying calm. Even with fever and blood loss, you haven't wavered once. James smiled grimly. Practice. Fear's like any other enemy. Show it weakness, and it'll destroy you. A branch cracked somewhere behind them, sharp as a gunshot. In the winter silence, both tensed, listening. The sound could have been natural, ice and cold, doing their work on the forest. But James had survived this long by not believing in coincidences. Keep your voice low, he murmured. But tell me about this hut. Every detail you remember Thomas sharing. Sarah's words came careful and measured, belying her fear, built into a rock face, partially underground. One entrance, but Thomas found a crack in the back wall that vents smoke without showing outside. Defensive position. Small window beside the door. Logs thick enough to stop. Bullets, she paused. He used it once, waiting out bandits who'd been following him from a supply run. James absorbed this, adjusting their route slightly to keep to deeper cover. His side burned with every movement, but he forced the pain down, focusing on the terrain ahead. The broken compass knocked against his ribs with each step, a reminder of how quickly certainty could shatter. Another sound carried on the wind, the distant whinny of a horse. Sarah's fingers dug into his coat. "They're following the ghost trail," she whispered. "No." James guided their mount behind a stand of thick pines. "They're following us. Your husband's path is too subtle for men like them to read." "How long have they been back there?" "At least an hour, keeping their distance, waiting for us to make a mistake." He checked his pistol again. Still only 3 rounds. "Or for the storm to force our hand." The first heavy flakes began to fall as they spotted the shepherd's hut, nearly invisible against the grey stone of the cliff face. James studied the approach carefully, noting the natural channels that would force any attackers to expose themselves. "It'll do," he decided, "but we'll need to be clever about this." Sarah slid down first, taking Emma to the relative shelter of a boulder while James dismounted. His wound protested sharply, and he had to catch himself against the saddle. "You're bleeding again," Sarah observed, her free hand reaching toward his side. Later, James unsaddled the horse, removing anything that might identify it as his mount. "When we're inside, I'll need you to help me set up a few surprises for our friends." "What kind of surprises?" He met her eyes, saw the same steel there, that had faced him down with a revolver the day before. The kind that'll make them think twice about following a ghost trail in a snowstorm. The broken compass weighed in his pocket as they made their way to the hut's entrance. Its confused needle didn't matter anymore. He had Sarah's sure knowledge of the land and Thomas's careful markings to guide them. Sometimes, he reflected, a man had to learn to navigate by different stars than the ones he'd always trusted. In the dim light of the shepherd's hut, Sarah drew her mother's Bible from her pack. The leather cover was cracked and worn, its pages wavy from years of frontier damp, but the words inside remained clear as truth. She'd been saving the candle stub, but now seemed the time for light. James worked quietly by the small window, setting up what he called discouragements, clever arrangements of wire and metal that would make approaching the hut in darkness a painful proposition. His movements were practiced, but growing slower, his wound taking its toll. "Your trap work is neat," Sarah observed, Emma sleeping soundly in a nest of blankets beside her. "Not what I'd expect from a lawman. Learned from the other side." He tied off a final knot. "Best way to catch clever men is to think like them." The storm was building outside, wind keening through the rock face behind them. Sarah opened the Bible, its familiar pages falling to Psalms. "My mother read this during storms," she said softly, "said it reminded her that even the worst tempest passes." James settled beside the small fire they dared to build, checking his pistol one more time. "What did your husband believe about storms and such?" "Thomas?" Sarah smiled at the memory. "He said God spoke in weather, that storms were just heaven's way of rearranging the earth to suit its purposes." "And what do you believe?" Sarah considered the question, running her fingers over the Bible's worn pages. "I believe God helps those who help themselves, and right now he's helping by providing a storm to cover our tracks." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. "Practical faith. I like that." The wind rose higher, and Emma stirred restlessly. Sarah read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me," James finished unexpectedly. At her look, he shrugged. "My Mary used to read that one too." Sarah studied him in the candlelight. "Tell me about her." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was like you, strong, but gentle with it. Could shoot straight and so straight, and saw no contradiction in that." He touched his side, wincing. "Would have known better than my rough doctoring." The wound's worse, had better days. He tried to make light of it, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes. She set the Bible aside and moved to check his bandages. The skin around the wound was hot, angry. We need to clean it again, and you need to rest. Rest comes after we lose our shadows. But he didn't resist as she helped him lie back on their shared blankets. Sarah retrieved her grandmother's medicine pouch, but her herbs were running low. Outside, the storm reached full fury, snow and wind battering the hut's sturdy walls. She read again by candlelight, this time about David hiding in the wilderness, pursued by enemies. Strange, James murmured, fever making his voice distant. Never thought I'd end up like this. Like what? Trusting someone again, caring what happens next. His eyes closed. Dangerous thing, hope. Sarah touched the Bible's cover, thinking of all the hopes it had witnessed, her mother's, her own, and now this new, fragile thing growing between her and James. Hope's what keeps us human, she said. Thomas used to say that too. A sound carried through the storm. Might have been a horse's whinny, might have been just the wind. James's eyes opened. Fever-bright but alert. They're still out there, he said, waiting for the storm to break. Then we'll wait longer. Sarah's voice held certainty. I learned patience from mountain winters. Did your Mary ever teach you that? She tried, the ghost of a smile again. Never was very good at listening. Sarah returned to the Psalms, reading steadily as the storm raged, and James's fever rose. Emma slept peacefully. The Bible's familiar words a lullaby older than memory. Outside, somewhere in the white fury, killers waited. But in here, in this moment, there was a kind of peace. The candle burned low, making the Bible's shadow dance on the rough walls. Sarah read on, her voice a thread of warmth in the cold night, while James fought his fever and the storm sang its wild hymn around them. The leather roll of tools lay open between them, each implement gleaming dully in the pre-dawn light. Wire and cutters, files, small coils of brass wire, and other pieces Sarah couldn't name. A craftsman's kit turned to deadlier purpose. These were Thomas's, she said, touching a well-worn pair of pliers, for repairing mining equipment. Never thought they'd be used like this. James sorted through the tools with practiced hands, his fever finally broken, but leaving him hollow-eyed with exhaustion. Good steel, he commented. He knew quality. The storm had passed in the night, leaving a world transformed. Fresh snow lay deep around the hut, pristine except for a single track of deer prints, nature's own false trail. Show me again, Sarah said, watching James's hands as he demonstrated how to set a snare. Emma slept in her blanket nest, stronger now after a night of rest and warmth. Tension's the key, he explained, working the wire. Too tight, it'll snap. Too loose, it's useless. Like most things in life, it's about finding the balance. Sarah tried to copy his movements, her fingers stiff with cold despite the fire's warmth. Like marriage, she said softly. Thomas used to say that, called it a dance of give and take. James's hands stilled. Your Thomas was a wise man. He was. She finished the snare, held it up for inspection. Will this hold? It'll do. There. Your fingers brushed as he took it and neither pulled away immediately. You're a quick study. Had to be. Frontier doesn't forgive slow learners. She began working on another snare, movements more confident now. Tell me about the Rikers again. How they think, how they move. James checked his pistol for the 100th time. Still only 3 rounds. Matthew's the brains. Luke's the tracker. John's got a temper. And Mark, he paused. Mark's the one to watch. Youngest but coldest. No conscience at all. Like their father? Worse. The old man at least believed in something, even if it was a twisted version of scripture. These boys, he shook his head, they believe in nothing but themselves. Sarah laid out the snares they'd made, 12 in all, each capable of crippling a man or horse. Where do we set them? James moved to the window, studying the terrain. They'll come from the east, using the ridge for cover. We'll layer the approaches. First line to slow them, second to channel them, third to hold them where we can see them. And then, he met her eyes, then we pray 3 bullets are enough. Sarah stood, checking that Emma was still sleeping soundly. Show me how to shoot. Properly, I mean, not just Thomas's basic lessons. With what ammunition? She pulled Thomas's revolver from her skirts. 6 shots. Saved them all this time, waiting for something worth the powder. James took the gun, checked its action. Good weapon, well maintained. He handed it back. But are you sure? These were your last connection to him? No. Sarah's voice was firm. Emma is my connection to Thomas. These bullets, they're just tools like any other. Time they were used. The next hour was spent in careful instruction. James taught her about stance, about breathing, about the way fear could make you rush a shot. His hands were gentle as they corrected her grip, his voice patient as he explained the fundamentals. You're natural at this, he said, as she dry-fired at knots in the wooden wall. Steady hands. Steady heart, she corrected. My grandmother used to say that's what matters most. Anyone can hold something still. Takes strength to keep your heart from shaking. A sound outside, branches cracking under snow's weight. Both froze, listening. After a moment, a rabbit bounded past the window. Time to set our surprises, James said quietly. They'll come soon. Men like that don't like waiting once they've picked up a trail. Sarah gathered the snares, each one a promise of protection. I'll take the north approach. You're still too weak for that much walking in deep snow. He started to protest, then nodded. Mark the safe path back. If anything feels wrong, I'll run like hell, she finished, smiling slightly. Grandmother taught me that too. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Then Sarah turned to check Emma one final time before heading out into the crystal morning. Thomas's tools in her hands and James's lessons in her heart, ready to lay their trap for men who thought themselves hunters. Sarah twisted her wedding ring as she watched through the hut's small window, an old habit that had once brought comfort. Now the gold band felt different, less like a memory and more like a promise of what she had to protect. The morning sun had just crested the ridge, painting the snow-covered ground in blinding white that made every shadow stark and deep. The first sign was subtle. A crow taking flight from a distant pine, then another. James touched her arm, a silent signal to move back from the window. He'd positioned himself by the door, Thomas's revolver ready, despite his weakened state. Remember, he whispered, let the traps do their work. Don't shoot until you have to. Emma was secured in the most protected corner, wrapped in every blanket they could spare. Sarah had fed her just before dawn, praying her daughter would stay quiet when they needed silence most. The first scream split the morning like an axe through ice. One of the outer snares had found its mark. Sarah's hand tightened on her own revolver, the metal warm from being held so long. That'll be John, James murmured, always too eager, too careless. Cursing carried across the snow, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle shot fired in anger. The bullets splintered wood well above their heads. Careful now, Sarah cautioned. That came from the East Ridge. James nodded approvingly. You've got a good ear for it. Mark's up there with the rifle. He'll try to keep us pinned while the others move in. Another trap sprung, this one producing no scream but the distinctive sound of a horse going down hard. The cursing turned creative, echoing off the rock face behind them. Luke's mount, James identified. He'll be on foot now, which makes him easier to track but more dangerous. He's better with that knife of his than with reins. Sarah shifted position, keeping to the shadows as she'd been taught. Her wedding ring caught a stray beam of sunlight, throwing a brief golden flash across the wall. The sight sparked a memory, Thomas holding her hand up to the sun the day he'd placed that ring on her finger, talking about how love was like gold, precious because it had survived fire. A voice called out from beyond the snare line. Cooper, we know you're in there. Make it easy on yourself. Matthew, James breathed. Notice he doesn't make promises about making it easy on you or Emma. Sarah's grip tightened on her revolver. He knows about us. Probably had someone watching the cabin. They know everything, which means they can't let any of us walk away. As if to emphasize his point, another shot cracked across the clearing. This one punched through the window, sending splinters of glass and wood across the floor. Emma stirred but didn't cry out, as if sensing the desperate need for silence. Marshal, Matthew called again, you've got one chance here. Send out the woman and kid and maybe we can talk terms. James's face hardened. "No terms with devils," he muttered, then raised his voice, kind of like the terms you offered Thomas Mitchell. A pause, then laughter, cold and empty as the winter wind. "The miner? That was business, Marshal. This here's personal." Sarah felt something shift inside her at those words. Her wedding ring, which had always pointed toward the past, suddenly felt like a weight pulling her into the present, into action. She moved to the window's other side, careful to stay low. "James," she whispered, "the back trap line, if they found the safe path through the front." He caught her meaning instantly. "They'll try to flank us, you're right." His eyes met hers. "But if we spring those traps too soon, we lose our fallback route," she finished. "So we don't spring them, we use them." A slow smile crossed his face, the first real one she'd seen from him. "Thomas teach you strategy too?" "No." Sarah checked her revolver one last time. "That I learned playing chess with my grandmother. She always said the best trap is the one your enemy thinks he sprung on you." Another shot from the ridge, another splinter of wood. But now they could hear movement at the back of the hut. Subtle sounds that would have gone unnoticed if they hadn't been waiting for them. Sarah touched her wedding ring once more, a final goodbye to who she'd been. When she spoke, her voice was steady as a rock face. "I'll take the back. You hold the front. Emma's safer if we don't cluster our defense." James studied her for a moment, seeing something in her face that made him nod. "Just like chess," he agreed softly. "The queen protects her king." "No," Sarah corrected, moving into position. "The mother protects her child. Everything else is just tactics." Emma's first tooth arrived like dawn, after the longest night, unexpected, yet somehow perfectly timed. Sarah discovered it while feeding her daughter in the calm after the fight. The tiny pearl of white, a startling reminder that life persisted even in the midst of violence. "Look," she whispered, calling James over from where he was rebinding. "His wound. She's growing." He touched Emma's cheek gently with one rough finger, earning a gummy smile that now held a glint of ivory. "Strong girl," he said softly, "like her mother." The shepherd's hut bore the scars of the morning's battle: splintered wood, spent cartridges and darker stains in the snow outside. But they'd held. Two of the Riker gang had fallen to their traps, a third to Sarah's steady aim when he'd tried the back approach. The others had withdrawn, but both Sarah and James knew it was only temporary. "How bad?" Sarah asked, nodding toward James's side as she settled Emma. "Had worse," but his face was drawn with pain. "Your grandmother's herbs helping some." Sarah laid Emma in her blanket nest and moved to check his bandages. The wound was angry but clean, no infection this time. Her hands were steady as she worked, though her mind kept returning to the moment she'd had to fire, to the sound a bullet makes when it finds its mark. "First killing's the hardest," James said, reading her thoughts. "Shouldn't ever get easier. Not for decent folk." "It wasn't hard," Sarah admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not when I thought about Thomas, about Emma, about what they'd do to us if we failed." James caught her hand as she finished with the bandage. "You did what you had to, what any mother would do." "Did I?" She looked at Emma, peaceful with her. "New tooth. Sometimes I wonder what Thomas would think of all this, of me. Man loved you enough to teach you to shoot, to show you how to survive." James's voice was gentle but firm. "Think he knew exactly what you were capable of." Outside, the day was wearing toward evening. They'd need to move soon. The shepherd's hut was compromised, and the Rikers would return with reinforcements. But for now, there was this moment of quiet, of Emma's milestone, marking time's passage as surely as any clock. "She's changing. So fast," Sarah mused, watching her daughter sleep. "Sometimes I forget she never knew Thomas, that all her firsts will be without him. Not without love, though." James moved carefully to check their supplies. "Not without protection." Sarah touched her wedding ring, then Emma's new tooth. "No, not without those." They began packing as the light faded, gathering what they could carry. James insisted she take the remaining ammunition for Thomas's revolver. He'd used 2 of his 3 rounds in the fight, saving the last for special occasions, as he put it. "We'll head north," he said, studying Thomas's map. "There's a ranger station marked here. 2 days' hard ride. If we're lucky, and if we're not lucky, he met her eyes. Then we make our own luck. Seems to be something you're good at. Sarah smiled, remembering the look on Luke Riker's face when he'd discovered her waiting behind the hut. Grandmother always said luck was just preparation, meeting opportunity. Wise woman, your grandmother. She'd have liked you. Sarah wrapped Emma carefully, preparing for the cold journey ahead. Said, I needed someone who could match me steel for steel. The words hung in the air between them, unplanned but not unwelcome. James checked his pistol, buying time before responding. Your grandmother say anything about broken-down marshals with more scars than sense? She said good men come marked by life. Sarah touched his bandaged side lightly. Shows they've lived enough to learn what matters. Emma stirred, her new tooth catching the last light through the window. Sarah lifted her daughter, this tiny being who kept growing, kept changing, kept pushing life forward, despite all attempts to freeze it in place. Ready? James asked, holding the door. Sarah nodded, keeping Emma close. Ready? And James, thank you for helping us make new firsts. His smile was brief but real. Thank you for making me want to see them. The silver cross caught moonlight as they rode, its chain wound tight around Sarah's wrist. Her mother had worn it through the cholera epidemic of 55, through the loss of 3 children, through every storm life had thrown at her. Now it guided another generation through darkness. Snow's starting to fall again, James murmured from behind her. They'd switched positions, Sarah leading now, her knowledge of Thomas's trails proving more valuable than James's strength as his wound took its toll. Emma slept against her chest, warm despite the bitter cold. Good, Sarah answered. Cover our tracks. They'd been riding for 6 hours, following the hidden paths marked on Thomas's map. The horse was tired, struggling under their combined weight through deep snow, but they couldn't stop, not with the Rikers regrouping behind them. The cross swung as their mount navigated a steep descent. Sarah's mother had always said it was Spanish silver, blessed by missionaries before the revolution. Silver remembers, she'd told Sarah, carries the prayers of everyone who's held it. James's breath was warm against her neck as he leaned forward. Movement on the ridge. Sarah saw it too, shadows flowing like water through trees. Could be deer, could be worse. They're paralleling us, James said softly, waiting for a clear shot. Then we don't give them one. Sarah guided their horse deeper into a ravine where thick pines created a natural ceiling of snow-laden branches. The cross pressed against her pulse point, steady as a heartbeat. Your mother's? James asked, noticing how she touched it. She gave it to me the day I married Thomas. Said every woman needs something old to carry forward. Sarah smiled at the memory. She'd have given me her wedding ring, but she was buried with it, Papa's request. Tell me about her. Sarah knew what he was doing, keeping her talking, keeping her mind sharp despite exhaustion. She was grateful for it. Rebecca Mitchell came west with nothing but faith and grit, lost 3 babies before me, but never lost hope. The cross swung again as they navigated around a fallen tree. Taught me everything about healing, about surviving. Said a woman's strength isn't in what she can take, but in what she can give and still keep standing. Sounds familiar, James said softly. A shot cracked through the trees, sending snow cascading from branches. Their horse reared, but Sarah held steady, guiding them deeper into cover. Mark, James identified, testing our nerve. Another shot, closer. Emma stirred but didn't wake, accustomed now to gunfire's lullaby. Sarah touched the cross again, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Ridge opens ahead, she warned. 1/4 mile of exposed ground before the next cover. James shifted behind her, checking his last bullet. They'll be waiting. Yes. Sarah felt strangely calm. But so are we. She pulled Thomas's map from her coat, studying it in the dim light. The cross illuminated the paper where moonlight struck silver, highlighting a detail she'd missed before. Here, she pointed. Thomas marked a cave system. Runs under that. Open ground. Risky. Caves can be dead ends, or they can be paths through mountains. Sarah traced the route. He's marked an exit here. Comes up right in the heart of that pine forest. James was quiet, considering. Another shot rang out, deliberately wide, herding them toward the open ground. "Your call," he said finally. "You know these trails better than any of us now." Sarah tucked the map away, touching the cross one final time. Her mother had always, said Silver remembers, but it could guide too, catching light in darkness, showing the way forward. "We take the caves," she decided. "They'll expect us to run for the trees. Men like that, they don't think about what's beneath their feet. Like Thomas did? Like Thomas taught me to." Sarah guided their horse toward a nearly invisible cleft in the rock face. He always said, "The land holds secrets for those who respect it enough to look." The cross swung like a pendulum as they dismounted, marking time between heartbeats. James helped her secure Emma while she checked their few remaining supplies. The cave mouth loomed before them, dark as destiny. "Your mother's cross," James said suddenly. "Does it still carry prayers?" Sarah looked at him, really looked, seeing the pain he was hiding, the fever threatening to return. "It carries hope," she said softly. "Sometimes that's the strongest. Prayer there is." He nodded, understanding. Together they led their horse into darkness, leaving false trails in the snow behind them. Above, the Rikers would find an empty ridge and tracks that led nowhere. Below, guided by Thomas's knowledge and a silver cross that remembered, they made their own path forward. James rolled his last bullet between his fingers, feeling its weight, a mere ounce of lead that might make the difference between life and death. In the cave's darkness, he couldn't see it, but he knew every scratch on its brass casing, had studied it during their rest stops until he could recognize it by touch alone. "Cave splits ahead," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with exhaustion. They'd been moving for hours through the underground maze, following Thomas's markings by lantern light. Emma was awake but quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. The bullet caught the dim light as James held it up. Which way? Sarah consulted the map, shielding their single lantern. The horse they'd been forced to leave behind at a narrow passage, taking only what they could carry. Thomas marked the right fork, says it rises toward the surface. And the left? No markings, probably for good reason. A sound echoed through. The caves could have been water dripping, could have been footsteps. Both froze, listening. James tucked the bullet back into his revolver, its weight now a promise rather than a question. "They followed us down," he said softly. "Had to. We left them no choice." Sarah's voice held no fear, only calculation. "But they don't have the map, don't know these passages." "Neither do we, not really." James touched the cave wall, feeling the damp stone. "We're trusting a dead man's directions. Thomas never steered me wrong in life. Won't start now." She shifted Emma to her other arm. "Besides, what choice do we have?" The sound came again, closer, definitely footsteps this time, echoing strangely in the cave system. "Take the map," James said, pressing it into her hands. "Get moving through the right fork. I'll hold here, buy you time." "With one bullet?" Sarah's free hand caught his arm. "That's not a plan. That's suicide. Better than all of us dying." He checked the revolver's action one final time. "I've lived longer than I expected anyway." No, the word was steel wrapped in silk. "We didn't come this far to start sacrificing each other now." Another echo, another step closer. James could almost count the footfalls now. "Sarah, listen to me, James Cooper. My husband died alone in the dark. I won't let you do the same." She pulled him closer, her breath warm against his ear. Thomas marked something else, a side passage just past the fork, narrow but deep, perfect for an ambush. James felt a smile tugging at his mouth despite their danger. "You're something else, Sarah Mitchell. So my mother always said. Now come on." They moved carefully, following the right fork until they found the hidden passage. It was barely more than a crack in the rock wall, but it went deep. Sarah and Emma fitted easily. James had to turn sideways, his wound protesting, but he made it. The bullet sat ready in its chamber as they waited, breathing shallow, listening to the approaching footsteps. Sarah had extinguished their lantern, leaving them in perfect darkness. "How many?" she whispered. "2, maybe 3, James breathed back, moving careful but not careful enough. A light appeared at the fork, a torch casting wild shadows. James counted heartbeats, waiting. One set of footsteps past their hiding place. Then another. "That's Luke!" Sarah identified. "Knows how to track, even down here." "Mark'll be with him," James agreed. "He never lets his brother hunt alone." The torchlight swung closer. James raised his revolver, the bullet ready. One shot. Had to make it count. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed once. Her meaning was clear. Wait. The Riker brothers moved past their position, following the right fork. Their torchlight began to fade as they moved deeper into the cave system. "Now what?" James whispered. "Now we double back. Take the left fork." Sarah's voice held quiet triumph. While they followed Thomas's false trail to a dead end, James almost laughed. "Your husband was a clever man. He was. Said the best trap is the one your enemy walks into willingly." They moved carefully back to the fork, then down the left passage. Behind them, they could hear the Riker's footsteps fading. The bullet remained unfired in James's revolver, still holding its promise. "How long before they realize?" he asked as they navigated the new tunnel. "Long enough." Sarah shifted Emma, who had started to fuss quietly. Thomas marked the dead end as being nearly a mile in. "By the time they figure it out, we'll be gone." James touched the bullet in his revolver. "Sometimes the best shot is the one you don't have to take." Sarah's free hand found his again in the darkness. This time, she didn't let go. The first ray of dawn split the darkness like a blade, cutting through the cave mouth they'd spent hours searching for. Sarah shielded her eyes, the sudden light almost painful after so long underground. Beside her, James drew a sharp breath. Whether from the brightness or his wound, she couldn't tell. "Look, Emma," she whispered to her daughter, who was wide, awake and restless. "That's morning coming to find us." The light grew stronger as they approached the opening, painting the cave walls in shades of gold and rose. Outside, fresh snow had fallen, covering their old tracks and any sign of the Riker's pursuit. The world looked newborn, untouched. "Beautiful," James murmured, "but dangerous. No cover for half a mile." Sarah studied the terrain. The cave exit opened onto a gentle slope that led down into a valley thick with pines. But reaching those pines meant crossing open ground, their dark figures stark against all that white. "We wait," she decided. "Watch for a while." They settled just inside the cave mouth, where shadow met light. Emma began to fuss, hungry after their long night. Sarah fed her while James kept watch, his hand never far from the revolver with its single bullet. "Sun'll be up soon," he said. "Full light in less than an hour." "Good. We'll be able to see them coming." Sarah stroked Emma's cheek as she nursed. "If they figured out our trick yet." "They did," James's voice was certain. "Men like that, they don't take kindly to being fooled. Makes them angry, makes them careless." The light strengthened, revealing more of the valley below. Fresh deer tracks crossed the snow, a good sign. If deer felt safe enough to move, perhaps their hunters were still far behind. "Tell me about after," Sarah said suddenly. "After?" "After we reach the ranger station, after the Rikers." She met his eyes. "What comes next?" James was quiet for a long moment, watching the light. "Paint the world in new colors." "Never been much good at after," he admitted. "Always been about the next job, the next chase." "And now?" He looked at her then, really looked, seeing how the dawn light caught in her hair, how naturally she held both Emma and Thomas's revolver. "Now I'm thinking maybe there's more to life than hunting bad men." Emma finished nursing and Sarah adjusted her clothes. The morning light had reached them fully now, warming the cave entrance. "My grandmother would say that's a start." "Your grandmother seems to have had wisdom for every occasion." "She did," Sarah smiled. "She also said a man who starts thinking about after is a man worth keeping around." The light suddenly caught movement in the valley, a flash of metal, quickly hidden. James tensed, but Sarah touched his arm. "Look again," she whispered. "That's a ranger's badge." Two mounted figures emerged from the tree line, moving with the careful precision of men who knew their business. Their badges glinted in the strengthening dawn. "Henderson," James breathed. "Must have gotten my message from the last town. Friends of yours, better, men who believe in the law more than money." He stood carefully, mindful of his wound. "Stay here. Let me make sure." Sarah watched as James stepped into the full light, keeping his hands visible. The rangers spotted him immediately. hands moving to weapons before recognition set in. The older one, Henderson, she assumed, raised an arm in greeting. "That's our escort to safety," James said, turning back to her. The dawn light caught his face, softening the hard lines of worry and pain. "Ready to ride?" Sarah stood, gathering Emma close. The light touched her daughter's face, making her smile. Such a simple thing, sunlight. But after the long dark of the caves, it felt like a benediction. "What about the Rikers?" she asked. "Henderson's got 6 men with him, all told. Some watching the other cave exits, some tracking our friends through the tunnels." His smile held grim satisfaction. "Like I said, men who believe in the law." They made their way down the slope carefully, the snow pristine under their feet. Each step took them further from darkness, from pursuit, from the fear that had driven them into the earth. "James," Sarah said as they neared the rangers, "about after—" He turned to her, his face gilded by morning light. "Yes, I think my grandmother would approve." His smile then was brighter than the dawn. Together, they walked the last few steps into the morning, leaving the shadows behind. The badge lay heavy in James's hand, its silver surface scarred but unbroken. He'd carried it for 20 years, through dust storms and gun battles, through every dark turn his life had taken. Now, as Henderson's men surrounded the cave mouth, where the Riker brothers were cornered, it felt like both burden and strength. "They're not coming quiet," Henderson warned, his breath frosting in the morning. Luke's wounded but mean. Mark's got high ground inside, and Matthew's got nothing left to lose." Sarah stood near the ranger horses, Emma secure against her chest. Her eyes met James's across the space between them, carrying a message clear. "As sunlight, be careful. Come back." "Never expected them to come quiet," James said, pinning the badge back on his coat. His wound ached, but the pain felt distant now, unimportant. "But they're coming, one way or another." A shot rang out from the cave, striking snow near Henderson's feet. The rangers took cover, their rifles trained on the opening. "Marshal Cooper," Matthew's voice echoed from the darkness, "should have killed you when we had the chance." "Lot of men have said that," James called back. "They're all hanging or buried now." Sarah had moved closer, despite Henderson's men trying to wave her back. "They killed Thomas," she said quietly, "made our daughter an orphan. Don't let them walk away." James touched her shoulder, feeling the strength in her. "No man walks away from murder. Not while I wear this badge." Another shot, closer this time. Mark's work, the boy had always been the best shot of the brothers. "Last chance, Rikers," Henderson shouted. "Come out with your hands clear." Laughter echoed from the cave, cold and empty as a winter grave. "Come in and get us, law dog." James checked his revolver, still that single bullet, waiting for its moment. Sarah pressed Thomas's gun into his other hand. 6 shots, she reminded him. "Use them well." He nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. The badge caught morning light as he moved forward, keeping to what cover the terrain offered. "Matthew," he called, "your brothers follow you into that cave. You going to follow them to the gallows too? Rather hang than bend knee to your kind of law." "Not about bending knee." James worked his way closer, sensing the rangers moving to flank the cave mouth. "About paying debts. Thomas Mitchell's debt. All the others." A shadow moved inside the cave, Luke trying to get a better angle. James held his position. "You know what your father used to preach?" he continued. "Before the war turned him crazy, used to preach about judgment, about how every man faces it sooner or later." "Shut up about our father." That was Mark, his voice cracking with rage. "Good man once, before he started thinking the law was whatever he said it was, before he raised his sons to be killers." Matthew's voice came again, harder now. "Last words, Marshal. Choose them careful." James felt Sarah's presence behind him, steady as a heartbeat. The badge sat heavy over his heart, carrying the weight of all it represented. "I choose these," he said clearly. "Thomas Mitchell was a good man, didn't deserve to die in the dark. His daughter deserves to know justice was done." The cave mouth exploded in gunfire. James rolled, coming up firing with Thomas's revolver. Sarah's 6 shots found homes in the darkness, covering Henderson's men as they rushed forward. Luke came charging out, knife gleaming. James's last bullet, his own bullet saved so long, took him in the chest. Mark fired from above, but the Rangers had his position marked. The exchange was brief, brutal. When silence fell again, Matthew stood alone in the cave mouth, his gun empty. "No gallows!" he snarled, raising his pistol despite the rifles trained on him. "Your choice," James said quietly, and the badges of 7 lawmen caught the sun as justice was done. After, as Henderson's men handled what needed handling, Sarah came to stand beside James. Emma was awake, watching the world with curious eyes. "It's finished," she asked. James touched his badge, feeling its familiar weight. "It's finished. Thomas can rest easy now. And us?" He looked at her then, seeing all the strength and grace that had brought them through darkness to this moment. The badge no longer felt like a burden, more like a promise kept. "Us," he said softly. "We're just beginning." The morning sun rose higher, warming the snow around them. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang in the town they'd been trying to reach, carrying across the pristine white like a benediction. The homestead deed lay on the table between them, its fresh, ink still drying in the warm light of the town clerk's office. Sarah traced the flowing script that declared the property transferred to James Cooper and Sarah Mitchell, joint holders. A new piece of land, untouched by old griefs or spilled blood. 20 acres, James said softly. Good water rights. Enough pasture for a small herd. He paused, watching her face. "If that's what you want." Emma sat in Sarah's lap, fascinated by the clerk's brass seal that had made their claim official. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the caves, weeks spent healing, planning, and carefully not speaking of goodbyes. "The old place," Sarah began, then stopped, gathering her thoughts. "Thomas loved it, put everything he had into making it work. We don't have to decide today." James's hand covered hers on the deed. "Property's not going anywhere." But Sarah shook her head, certainty settling over her like a familiar shawl. "No." Thomas believed in building things, in making tomorrow better than yesterday. She met James's eyes. "This feels right." The clerk returned with their copies, each bearing the territorial seal. "Congratulations," he said, nodding to them both. "Land's yours, free and clear." Outside, spring was creeping into the mountain town. Snow still capped the distant peaks, but here in the valley, green things were pushing through the frost. New life, new beginnings. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the boarding house where they'd been staying. James adjusted his gun belt, a new one, the marshal's badge still catching light on his chest. "Henderson offered me a permanent post here. Town needs a lawman who knows the territory, and the territory needs a lawman who knows its people." Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip. "My grandmother would say that's no coincidence." They stopped at the general store, where Sarah had ordered supplies for their new home. The shopkeeper's wife fussed over Emma while they loaded their wagon, clearly pleased to have a baby to spoil. "Letter came for you," the shopkeeper said, handing James an envelope. "From back east." James opened it carefully, reading with an expression Sarah had learned to read these past weeks. "Mary's sister," he explained, "wondering if I ever found peace out here." "And did you?" He looked at her then, at Emma, at the deed that promised a future neither of them had expected. "Found something better," he said softly. "Found family." The word hung between them, warm as spring sunshine. Sarah thought of Thomas, of how he'd always said love wasn't a fixed quantity, that hearts could grow to hold more without betraying. What came before? "Your Mary," she said carefully. "Would she approve of all this?" James tucked the letter away, his face gentle with memory. Mary believed in second chances, in building new things from broken pieces. He touched the deed in Sarah's hand. Think she and Thomas might have understood each other. Emma reached for him then, a request he answered without hesitation. Sarah watched them together, seeing how naturally her daughter fit in his arms, how easily love could expand to fill empty spaces. "The house needs work," James said as they loaded the last of their supplies. "Roof's sound, but the barn'll take some fixing. Good thing I know my way around tools." Sarah smiled, remembering Thomas's kit and how it had helped save their lives. And you know your way around building things that last. They climbed onto the wagon seat together, Emma settled between them. The deed sat safely in Sarah's pocket, its promise weight like a welcome anchor. "Ready?" James asked, taking up the reins. Sarah looked back at the town, at the mountains beyond where their story had begun in snow and desperation, then forward, toward the valley where their new home waited. "Ready," she said, and meant it with all her heart. 1 year later, Sarah held the family portrait in her hands, studying how the photographer had captured them in silver and light. Emma stood proudly between them, no longer the desperate infant, wrapped in snow, but a thriving toddler with Thomas's eyes and her own determined chin. James's marshal's badge caught the camera's flash, and Sarah's mother's cross lay bright against her dark dress. "Came out nice," James said, coming in from his evening patrol. The spring air followed him, carrying the scent of new grass and possibility, though it doesn't show your smile right. "That's because someone wouldn't stop making faces at Emma during the sitting," Sarah replied, setting the portrait on their mantel. It stood beside Thomas's photograph, past and present sharing space in their home. The house had grown with them over the year, new rooms added, old spaces renewed. James's law books shared shelves with Sarah's medical texts, and Emma's toys scattered across floors that no longer creaked with lonely echoes. "Henderson's retiring," James said, hanging his gun belt on its peg, "offered me his position." Sarah turned from arranging the portrait. "Sheriff says the territory's changing, needs law that understands both justice and mercy." He smiled. "Told him I'd have to discuss it with my family." The words still warmed her, even after all these months. Family? Not just her and Emma anymore, but a whole tapestry of love woven from threads of loss and hope. "What does your heart say?" she asked, the way her grandmother had always taught her. James crossed to the mantel, studying the two photographs. "Says I've spent enough years chasing. Time to build something lasting." He touched the portrait's frame. "Already started, truth be told." Emma's laugh carried from the kitchen, where she was helping their housekeeper with dinner. Such a simple sound, but one that had seemed impossible during that desperate winter. "Thomas would approve," Sarah said softly, "of all of it. The house, the changes, us. Think so?" He believed in life going on, in love, growing new branches. She touched her belly, where their second child was just beginning to show. In families finding their way home, James's hand covered hers, warm and sure. Outside, the sun was setting over their 20 acres, painting the spring grass in shades of gold. Their barn stood solid against the sky, its new timber weathering to match the old. "Speaking of family," James said, "got a letter from Mary's sister again. Says she'd like to visit, meet Emma, see the life we've built." "She's welcome," Sarah answered without hesitation. "All our ghosts are." The portrait caught the last sunlight, making their captured images glow. A marshal with healing scars, a widow who'd found strength in loss, and a child who'd survived the snow to bloom in warmth. Not the family any of them had expected, but precious for all that. "Year ago," James mused, "I was bleeding in a snowstorm. Sure I'd die alone, and I was wrapping my baby in snow, praying for a miracle." He drew her close, their child growing between them. "Got more than we prayed for, I'd say." Emma burst in then, flower on her face and joy in her voice. "Papa, Mama, come see what I made." They followed their daughter to the kitchen, leaving the portrait to stand guard over their memories. In its silver surface, light and shadow balanced perfectly, the past honored, the present cherished, and the future full of promise. That night, after Emma was asleep, and the house had settled into its peaceful creaks and whispers, Sarah added a final note to her journal. "Love," she wrote, "is like the spring thaw. It doesn't erase the winter that came before, but it promises that life goes on, that warmth returns, that even the deepest snow eventually yields to hope." She closed the book and joined James on their porch, where they sat together watching stars emerge over the land that had become their home. No more running, no more hunting, no more wrapping babies in snow and praying for salvation. Just this, a family built from broken pieces, made stronger by the mending.